Hi, I'm Sherri Douville, CEO at Medigram. We got some tough news today of accelerating cases at the highest rate since the pandemic and accelerating hospitalization. So I want to talk about how we should be thinking about our mindset to keep ourselves safe, the ones we love safe, as well as those that we come into contact with. And in addition to that, I want to also cover how we might think about managing ourselves in terms of managing our environment so that we can have, optimal immunity to the viruses that whether it's COVID-19 or any other number of viruses that come out this time of year. One thing that was super helpful is a recent conversation with a colleague when you're talking about risk management and the Swiss cheese model. It's very common in quality management and medicine, and also in cybersecurity. They might refer to it as defense in depth because you have multiple layers. When you're looking at each layer, you have tremendous amount of power to impact your ability to stay safe. And it's the layering, there's no perfect impermeable layer. It's the layering on of these mitigations that help you reduce your risk. So those include distancing physically, so not mixing households for Thanksgiving, using masks, using the right kind of masks with the right kind of meltable in material, KN95, maybe using 2 KN95s if you're a healthcare worker, ideally a well-fitted N95 mask, using hand hygiene, managing ventilation and filtration because we do know that it's airborne, and I've talked to many of you about that. And also the way that the virus behaves in the winter is what I wanted to focus on today. So let's talk for a second about an impending vaccine. I'm very excited about the potential for a highly effective and safe vaccine. I also would be looking forward to hearing what the plan is for the distribution of that vaccine, knowing that it requires cold chain logistics. Now, why does the vaccine require cold chain logistics? Because in order for it to stay active and stable and useful, it has to remain cold. When you think about how a vaccine has to stay useful, it's the inverse, but the same principles in terms of why the virus thrives in the wintertime. It thrives in the cold and the dry air outside. But there's more to the story, because when it's cold and dry outside, what do we do inside? We crank up the heat. When we crank up the heat, what happens to us is that as humans, that impacts us and we're more dry. I'm not going to get graphic about our nasal passages and why that matters. What I'd like to do is describe it in a way I hope it's simple and easy to understand, and that you could simply explain to anyone else and hopefully share with them why they might be thinking about this. So if you just think about a cigar, for those of you, and we're not promoting smoking, but we were thinking about something that requires humidity and why it requires a certain level of humidity. And when you think about it as an analogy, it's a very similar way of thinking about how you take care of yourself and your environment in order to think about optimizing your defense against some of these viruses. So in order to enjoy this, as somebody who's really into cigars, they're looking for like a target moisture level of oils and resin, and that target humidity is about 60 to 72%. And how would they go about maintaining this is that they would employ a humidifier with the appropriate liquid, and they would have this hygrometer that they would use as a monitor and measure to make sure that they're maintaining the right level so that this stays usable. Now, what happens if you're not maintaining the humidity and the hygrometer reading goes down and it says that your cigars are going to be dry? Well, what happens is if it gets too dry, it lights up too quickly, and that's not just not enjoyable, it's also kind of dangerous. And that's how it's a lot like the virus. The virus, a good analogy is that it's like a fire. And so it's raging across, really the world. And what it's looking for are dry trees and dry kindling, which are people who haven't been affected yet. So when you think about how you can also protect yourself, in addition to all the mitigations we discussed in the Swiss cheese model or the defense in depth model, because there is no such thing as a silver bullet in this pandemic, you might also want to think about humidity. So what happens when it's cold outside is that we turn the heat up. Well, when we turn the heat up, the humidity goes down to 20, and that's not high enough to keep the protective moisture in our nasal passages adequately defending us. So I would encourage you to think about getting a hygrometer to measure your air. Think about humidifying your workspace. Just as I encourage many of you to look at HEPA filters and as well as your ventilation, so that we're doing everything that we can to be responsible, to take care of ourselves, take care of people that we love, and also manage ourselves and feel like we're being proactive so that we can continue to perform, as people, perform, driving our companies forward, and then also be there really as a human for the people in our lives, not just, this Thanksgiving next week, but also lots of Thanksgivings after that. So hopefully this was simple to understand, thinking about how you might manage your defenses, similar to thinking about how you might take care of a cigar if you had ever thought about taking care of a cigar. And that would be something simple for you to try to explain to somebody else and that anybody else could explain it to anybody else. So I'd love to hear how you're thinking about your defense in depth or Swiss cheese model of defense as we roll into the holiday season. And please be safe.